genius of the mind. So many stories to unwind.
Welcome to the Writer's Bog. In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about formatting and finally starting your first page. So your Word doc is open and your keyboard is ready. Your first sentence of your very own book. Enjoy the feeling because it's worth enjoying, but don't start typing yet. Really quick, make sure you're using double spacing, 12-point Times New Roman, and indenting the beginning of every new paragraph. With that one sentence, I've saved you hours of manual formatting later. Here are 2 more time savers. Don't number your chapters unless you really want to, but give them a title. Even if the title is just a description of what happens in the chapter, you can change that later. And add a hashtag or another symbol between your scene breaks. The reason you usually don't want to number your chapters in the beginning is because you might end up changing the order of the chapters later. But if numbering the chapters makes them easier to keep track of for you, then go for it. Just remember to keep track of their numbers if you end up changing the order later. As for the symbol between scene breaks, it's simply a way to see the breaks between the scenes more easily. When you start the first page of your first draft, you have to keep one thing in mind. You're writing to get the story out of your head and onto the page. The first draft should be for your eyes only. That also goes for the first page of the first draft. When you're trying to pitch or sell a book, the first page is the most important page of the whole thing. Luckily, the first page for your first draft isn't supposed to attract anyone. It's supposed to get you started on writing the whole thing. If you're not sure how to start your first page or how to start your book, there are a few things you can try. The first one is to think of what the state of the world and the main character will be by the end and make them the opposite in the beginning. Or you could, and probably should, come up with an inciting incident before you start writing. And just write a normal day in the life of your main character until the inciting incident happens on day 2 and starts the story off properly. Once you have an idea of what the beginning of the story will be, you need to decide how early in the story to start the book. So, there are 2 general trains of thought when it comes to how to start your book. I'll tell you both and you decide which sounds more appealing to you. Either you start at the very beginning of what your story is. You start with a setup. If you're writing a fantasy novel, as a simple example, you could start the first page with an explanation of your world and the history of the world that led up to the beginning of your story. If you're writing a contemporary thriller, you could start with a summary of the main character's childhood and how they ended up where they're at in the beginning of the story. This approach can help you as a writer ease into your story and your characters instead of hopping right into the action and possibly feeling overwhelmed. Speaking of the second way to start your story, this is it. You start off right in the middle of the action. Following our previous examples, if you write a fantasy, you could skip explaining literally all of the world building and history that led up to your main character's home being raided and burnt down by bandits, and just open with your main character's home being raided by bandits. Or for the thriller, you can skip explaining why your main character is an alcoholic, criminal-turned PI with a bounty on his head from his criminal ex-boss for betraying the crime syndicate, and just cut to the PI surviving an attempt on his life ordered by his ex-boss, and now has to spend the whole book trying to prove his ex-boss is trying to kill him without outing himself as an ex-criminal in the process. Doing it this way can get you a lot more engaged in your story right off the bat and possibly help you keep the momentum going through the opening part of your story. Now, to help you get started, here's a general overview of how to write a scene. A good rule of thumb is to start the scene by explaining the setting of the scene a little bit. And usually you don't start with dialogue unless you're going for a very specific kind of scene. For example, if you start your ex-criminal PI thriller book with, "I have no idea who you are," Zack said. "You're not supposed to," the assassin replied. No one's gonna have any idea what the fuck is going on. They can't picture the scene because you haven't given them a picture yet. A better way to start would be, Zack sat in his office. The office was dark, save the streaks of moonlight creeping in through the window shutters. Normally Zack was in his office alone, but tonight there was another man sitting across from him. Both had their pistols in hand, aimed at each other nonchalantly. That paints a picture. For most scenes, you should start with the setting and where the character's at in the setting. From there, you let the scene play out. Once the scene accomplishes what it's supposed to, end it and move on to the next important scene. No one is going to care about Zack's nightly routine. They don't care about when Zack goes to the bathroom. They don't care about his tax returns. What they care about is how he fights off the assassin. And once he does fight off the assassin, the next thing they care about is how Zack deals with the consequences of fighting off the assassin. Maybe he got shot in the arm and has to go to the hospital before he bleeds out. Maybe he should call the police, but doesn't, because then his secretive criminal past might be exposed. They could care less about watching him order takeout for 3 pages at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday night. One less thing to hopefully help you get started and keep your momentum going. Another good thing to think about while you're writing is the different levels of your story. The best way to keep a story engaging, not only to read but also to write, is to keep it all relevant. One sentence should lead into the next sentence. One paragraph into the next paragraph. Scene to scene, chapter to chapter, beginning to end. It will keep you engaged and on track. I don't expect you to remember all or even any of this for the rest of time. Ultimately, being your first book, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to forget things. Now that's not because it's your first book, but the fact that you might not be used to that sort of thing could be because it's your first book. Every writer makes mistakes, forgets things, changes their minds, adds things, removes things. Nothing you write has to be set in stone. The point of doing things as well as you can the first time isn't that it stops your book from ever being good. It just saves you time from having to edit more later. On top of that, once you've written a few times, start developing a consistent habit of it if you can. Write for 30 minutes a day at a minimum. In a way, learning to write a book is like learning to play guitar. Repetition and practice are how you get better, not listening to songs and playing an air guitar as you think of how much fun it would be to perform the song to a crowd of 1,000 people. Daydreaming gets you started, but repetition, practice, and discipline gets you the rest of the way. And I think that's enough for one day. Thanks for watching. In the next few videos, I'll talk about different ways you can organize your stories to make keeping track of everything easier, as well as ways to come up with a story or ideas for a story that you already have if you end up getting stuck or just want to write but don't know what to write in the first place. Hope to see you there.